And here we are again, happy Friday, and more importantly, happy International Women's Day. And a very special thank you, before we get started, to our Community Director, Precious, for all the work she does bringing the community together. Precious, thank you so much. It's very much appreciated. And there we go, a massive welcome to all of our subscribers, first-time viewers, and LinkedIn members to the CISO Experience, where we get to engage with and learn from security leaders. And today I'm joined by the CISO of Fisker, Alexander Bermudez, where we're going to be discussing his journey and taking our audience's questions all the way through. So a bit about Alex. He's an experienced security leader with over 20 years in IT security and privacy. He's been leading teams now for nearly 15 years, and his experience includes multiple industries, including automotive, manufacturing, aerospace, healthcare, financial services, subprime lending and retail. He enjoys giving back and learning from the security community, is a governing board member of Gartner Evanta CISO, FBI InfraGard, and is an FBI Executive Advisory Board member. He's currently the CISO and Data Protection Officer for Fisker, an electric automotive manufacturer based in Manhattan Beach, California, and he's previously the VP CISO for Panasonic North America. But before we bring Alex on, and for those new to the channel, I'm your host, Simon Lindstedt, and by sharing stories and best practices over the last few months, it's led to over 180,000 views here on YouTube by you, our amazing 9,291 subscribers. Thank you so much for all of your support. And let's not forget where all this has come from. It's come from the free and global InfoSec Live community, founded back in 2021, now with 6,000 members, collaborating with study groups, mentor sessions, and regular networking events to help you raise your game in cybersecurity, no matter what stage you are in your career. Now, make sure you check out the community. If you work in security and you think, I'm not scanning that QR code, the link for the community is in the description of the event as well. So if you're not brave enough to scan that, please do use the link there. And again, if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community or just buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, we do have a way you can show your appreciation right here on our YouTube channel with 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters to us. So if you're watching this live, please do hit that bell, please do subscribe and make sure you're notified of future content. And remember, each and every one of our live shows gives you, our audience, the chance to engage with our guests. So make sure you drop any questions you may have in the chat. You'll be pleased to know it's about that time for me to stop rambling on, get on with the show and bring on our guest. Let's get Alex on. Welcome.
Hi, Simon. Good morning. Or good afternoon.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are in the world. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and have a chat today. We had some technical issues at the start where we thought for a minute it might not happen. So thanks for persevering and making sure it did.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
No, not at all. First of all, I've given a bit of background, but what would be really interesting would be to hear about your journey into the industry, Alex.
Yeah, I would love to share. Yeah, I actually started out in help desk right before Y2K. So I was involved in a help desk job at a local law school. I was part of a very small IT group made up of 4 people. There was a network administrator that was handling, I think, Novell at the time, and we were transitioning to NT4.0, and then I know I'm dating myself. We had a director that was responsible for all things IT in the group of 4, and then it was a person I think I was handling EDI and some version of old school computing mainframe, and then of course myself, that was a help desk guy. And then from there, I just kind of transitioned into various jobs that worked my way up from being a system administrator to network administrator, network engineering. Eventually became systems security engineering, systems security architecture. It was kind of a very organic, natural progression through those various steps of, it's administration, engineering, architecture. You get a manager job all of a sudden, and then you work your way up to director, and then VP, and then CISO. So
And
it's been
how was the transition from the more technical hands-on keyboard role to the management role for you, Alex? Was it challenging or?
It's been painful.
Yeah. Talk to me about why it was painful.
I think when you're young, I was enamored by the technology. That's what drew me in. I love technology. That's why I'm still in the space. You tend to think that the fun stuff is actually playing with the newest and greatest toys, and I think I'm no different than most people that are involved in IT or IT security or cybersecurity. It's that is where the fun's at, and not only playing with the technology, but operating the technology and being able to add value to the organization. I also realized that there was, I got really good at some of these technologies, and I realized that there was an opportunity for me to move into architecture. I think that was the pivotal point for me. I pivoted from being an individual contributor that was doing very hands-on work with appliances and security operations to doing more of strategic guidance and partnering with the business to be able to provide trusted advisory. So in essence, the architect is really like a manager, but without the people. So that's kind of that transitory step that you take when you're just about going from individual contributor to becoming a manager. So I did the security architecture work, and that was fun. It was fun because it still allowed me to have hands-on in the technology, but I was taking a kind of a broader look at how the technology integrated into the bigger sphere of things within the organization. And then I had more business-focused, front-facing experiences, right? So now I was ensuring that what we were investing in was rationalized with, dollars and cents, and that it made sense, that it was addressing a real need in the organization.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to bring up this comment from Prashant because it sort of leads into the next question I was going to ask you, which is the evolving role of the CISO. I mean, you've been a leader in this space now. I think in your bio it said for about 15 years. Have you seen the role change? First question, and follow-up question to that: where do you see it going to? How do you see it adapting? And then that relates, I suppose, to Prashant's question: should the CISO be reporting to the CIO, CTO, or the board? And maybe you could start off at this. Yeah.
Start off with a question, or start off with
whatever you like. I've thrown about 400 questions at you, so you can pick one.
Well, I guess I'll tackle this one here. Should the CISO report to the CIO? How has it changed, right? And I think it's relative to this. So for me, it's I don't know if I'm unique, or I'm sure I have a common experience, but the change that I've seen is that when I first started in this space as a security manager, I felt like I had an open checkbook. And that was always nice. I think the general mantra at that point was, and SOX was big in my space. I was in financial lending, so subprime and retail, and I worked for a company that was about to go public, and so really it was all about ensuring that we had the right IT general controls, IT application control. That was the big thing, right? Enron and WorldCom had kind of fallen, and all organizations were highly scrutinized before they declared IPO. And so, anyways, for me, it was we've had an open checkbook. And I joke when I talk to people nowadays, I said back then it was open checkbook because the executives wanted to make sure that they had no orange jumpsuits, that they were kept out of jail and prison, and they didn't want to be in the news. And then I say, well, we've become legitimate. And by that I mean that we now have to rationalize our spend. We now have to rationalize our narrative and say, this is why we need $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is that we're asking to spend. Here's the real risk that it's addressing. And you don't get an open checkbook. You're competing with funds, and there's a risk appetite to absorb some of this. Some of these decisions are sometimes made not necessarily in favor of the recommendation I'm making. So I've seen that transition from here, do whatever you need to do to keep this problem away from us, to, okay, help me understand how spending that kind of money is going to help me reduce the probability that event is going to strike us. And when it does, how big will it be, type of thing.
And I suppose then it's looking at the capacity for loss for the organization as well. And like you said, their risk appetite as to whether they're prepared to stomach that risk, or they want to put their hands in the pocket and give you money. Do you think the the more high profile breaches and attacks we've seen, do you think they make a difference? Do they make an impact to people on the board, or do they still think it's not going to happen to them?
I guess I can just go by what the discussion circles are engaged in. If you take like TJ Maxx and that whole breach, I mean, some will say that had like very little impact. While the alternative choices are there, I can go to an alternative store that kind of resembles TJ Maxx. Most people, if they love TJ Maxx and they hear about a breach and they're being covered in terms of credit checks, they'll continue to shop there.
This has been my point, because people talk about reputational risk and reputational damage, and then you look at all the high profile businesses that have suffered these attacks, and I haven't really seen, I mean, there's a couple you could pick out where it smashed their bottom line a little bit, but the majority of the time, people don't really care. I think general public I'm talking about here, I don't think it means enough to them. And I think a lot of people feel like they're giving their data away to everyone anyway, to a certain extent.
I think that, they just take it for granted. It's like, we just expect that the organization is taking care of this for me. But if they haven't, what's the worst scenario here? Is my identity now in the black market? I don't think folks really truly understand when their data gets breached, where it goes and how it's going to have an impact on them downstream. So they tend to be a bit, I think, kind of maybe perhaps desensitized to the aftermath of, say, a TJ Maxx breach. But I think that if there were no immediate alternatives to, say, the entity, in this case TJ Maxx, if there's no immediate alternatives and you love TJ Maxx, then of course you're going to stick with TJ Maxx. If there's alternatives, you'll jump ship, you'll start buying from Amazon, you'll go somewhere else because you take a hard stance and you're not happy about the security posture and how they took care of your data. But to the question around the reporting structure, that's something I've struggled with, and I've championed in every organization I've gone into, because I've generally started out in the IT function. I've always reported to an executive VP or SVP of technology or a CIO. They've championed the cause for security because that's generally been kind of the general mantra. I'm seeing a transition, but I think Gartner put out a report that I had read, and they said that the majority of folks are still reporting under the CIO, with some sprinkling around, some folks kind of reporting to chief legal counsel, some reporting to chief human resources officers, and very few are reporting directly to the CEO.
And I suppose it depends upon the different organizations' internal structures as well, doesn't it, when you come on board, as to how that's going to go.
I agree. Yeah, I think, and then where they're at with their maturity. What type of CISO do you need, right? Do you need CISOs? One organization's CISO is another's security administrator. There's no really
and another one's security champion, right? This is the thing.
Exactly. So really depends on where the company's at. If they're very seasoned, they're global in nature, they're highly regulated. There's already some sort of precedent. They went through an incident. Perhaps they need a very seasoned CISO that's got really strong business acumen, and that person might be better placed closer to, say, the CEO or chief legal counsel. But I think it's really, every organization looks at it a little bit differently. Startups are interesting. I'm currently in startup, and startup tends to absolutely follow what's absolutely mandatory, and then the discretionary stuff, the cybersecurity opinion or the risk management decisions. That's a lot of discussion, right? That's a lot of storytelling, and we have to.
But you've got a much smaller budget pot to fight over with a startup, haven't you? And I've worked in my own and other people's startups. You also have to wear about 400 different hats as well, Alex, on a daily basis, right?
Very true. You got to be prepared to roll up your sleeves and do the work as well, and that's just the nature of startup, right? We're all in.
And I think it's not for everyone either, is it? Some people are more suited to big organizations, enterprise size. Some people thrive in a startup environment, but for others, not so much. It brings me kind of back to, I'm not going to mention names, but last year there was a lot of talk in the press about a particular CISO facing jail for a breach that happened. And there was a furore across LinkedIn of CISOs throwing their hands up, saying, oh, this isn't fair, and all this is this and this is that. What are your thoughts around people saying they want to be on the board? Do you think that's been a bit of a realization to people as to what that actually means and the responsibilities that come with it? Or do you think that's still the dream for every CISO?
I think the recent SEC cybersecurity ruling that just came out here in December that we're now required to adhere to, or at least public companies are now required to adhere to, is really kind of forcing the issue. Whether we like it or not, there will be CISO or at least security representation at the board. So for me, for example, now it's actually mandatory that I provide regular quarterly updates to the security board or the board audit committee on cybersecurity, and then I provide an annual update to the board as well. So I think that the law is now forcing us to ensure that that realization actually does take place. We don't have much choice.
Does that then force people like yourself to then look at protecting your own backside, as we say here in the UK, from if you don't implement or take my recommendations, please sign this form. I've heard a couple of people going down the waiver route recently. Don't know if
it is concerning for me, because I've done some reading on that, and obviously there's been folks and leaders that have been affected in this space, and so I did check to make sure my D&O insurance provided coverage for me, or at least that there was indemnification. But ultimately, I like to ensure that we have proper documentation around all the issues and decisions that are being made. And I hate to say it, but you got to cover your back as well, and make sure that as a trusted advisor to the organization, I also have to make sure that things are all documented. Decisions are made by other folks. I don't accept the risk. I don't. No. It's not my job to own the risk. It's my job to ensure that they're fully aware of how this could impact the organization and provide leadership the right information to make those decisions and accept it or not. But yeah, I think it's an area of concern. I think it'll continue to unfold, and we'll see what the actual real impact will be for CISOs. But for now, I know that I think it's real and it's impacting us. And for those CISOs that are operating in big companies that are publicly traded, we're going to see that they're now going to have to be providing regular updates to the board and the audit committees as well. So I don't think we're going to be able to get away from that.
No, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of watch this space, isn't it, to see how it develops. I wonder how it's going to impact people who work as fractional or VCSOs as well, with the agreements that they have in place with the firms that they're working for. I think that's another whole can of worms. I'm rambling, so I'm going to bring up another question here from Carmel Guy. Thank you very much for putting this in. How does the industry sector or regulatory environment impact the board's perception of security risks and their willingness to allocate resources to security initiatives? It's a good question as well.
How does the industry sector or regulatory environment? Well, the industry sector, I'll tackle mine. In my case, I work for Automotive. So we are highly regulated. We're in critical infrastructure. And if we want to sell vehicles in the European market, we have to adhere to very specific regulations. So in our case, it's a long acronym. We also from acronym overload, but there's another one. It's called UNECE, Working Party 29, Regulation 155 and 156.
Of course it is.
I've been really close to this thing, so I love saying this. Yeah, it's so basically, it's basically says that you're going to have a cybersecurity management system. You're going to do a bunch of stuff when you conceptualize a vehicle, when you build that vehicle, and then when that vehicle hits the road, you're going to continue to do a bunch of stuff, and that's stuff that we're all aware of, right? It's building security into your supply chain assessment. Right? So we don't build a car in a vacuum. So that definitely governs that regulation is governing how we build out our cybersecurity program to evaluate suppliers. Let me get to the gist of this. So regulatory environment impact the board's perception of security risks and their willingness to allocate resources.
I mean, one example for me would be, a SaaS provider who bring on a CISO as a champion and spend a lot of money on security to make sure that they get business from the people they want business from.
That's certainly one scenario. And in my case, I think that there is definitely incredible support for ensuring that we're adhering and complying with the law. If we don't comply with the law, if you're not pouring resources into the security program to meet, in our case, that UN regulation, we won't be able to sell. We won't be able to pass our audit. We already did, but we wouldn't be able to pass our audit and sell vehicles in this European market. So it has a direct impact to the bottom line. So some may argue that's just basic compliance work, right? But what I tend to do is I leverage the compliance drivers to ensure that I'm also narrating the real risk to the organization, right? So we talk about cyber risk and privacy risk along with the compliance risk that is being faced by the organization. But Yeah, it's not an unlimited budget. It's not an open checkbook, but it certainly is a big driver for ensuring we get board support and resource allocation for things that we need to make sure are operating in the environment to pass our audit.
Thank you. I won't mention names again, but I was on a call with the VP of sales for a very large cybersecurity vendor earlier on today, who said they had a terrible year last year when it came to getting budget from CISOs. But they have, and this is a very well-established, well-known provider. It's not Darktrace, by the way. They did say that they'd seen an uptick in the first quarter of this year. So I don't know if it's people trying to get their ship straight before a certain time or not. But I think as an industry, we're still, as a global economy, we've managed to, I suppose, fight off a recession somehow. And after working for 25 years in financial services and looking at the markets for all that time, we are overdue a recession, right? It's the market cycle, and it goes like this every 12 to 15 years. And this has been the most prolonged period of a bull market for a long time. And I think you've got lots of things that have impacted that. You've got the money that was pumped in over COVID. It's just a dozen things that have caused this kind of bubble that we're in at the moment. So I think challenging times ahead for a little while, in my opinion. People ask me all the time because they still think I'm a financial advisor, but I'm not. And this isn't advice, by the way, but I just think it's going to be tricky still for the next year or two, definitely. And we've both got big elections this year as well, haven't we? Which is going to, I mean, we're self-destructing over here right now. I don't really know what's going on over there either. So it's going to be quite interesting come October, November time, isn't it?
It's going to be an interesting ride, and it's going to be interesting because both of those presidents some are very I guess supportive of the EV sector, some are not, and so we'll see how that impacts our industry directly. But yeah, I mean,
some of your politicians are supportive of NATO and some aren't, so we're all twitchy over here about that at the moment. And do you know what? I don't want to get political. However, I do get that point about the NATO funding, because if you look at how many countries are actually funding up to their 2% of gross domestic product, it's not enough of them. And you can't expect to be in a club if you're not paying your way. So I do get that. But it is, I think we're very nervous over here for your election. And we're very nervous over here for our election as well, if I'm perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, we can take a lot of that offline for sure, but I don't want to rile anybody.
No, I agree.
It's a touchy subject.
I completely agree. And let me bring up the next question. We've got a couple here. Prashant, we'll bring up yours first. It's, if as a CISO you don't accept the security risk, who does?
Yeah, so in our case, what I try to do is make sure that there's at least a P&L owner. If when I do an inventory of crown jewels and assets, I'm looking at people and process and technology that has an impact on the bottom line. And we're working through our business impact assessments, our risk assessments. So there's a business continuity component to how we evaluate what's important to the organization. And there's generally a P&L owner. They have a hard time accepting that they're data owners or loss owners, but at the end of the day, they are ultimately the P&L owner. So I work with them, and I organically help them accept the risk, or not accept the risk, but at least understand the risk and help make the decision. Ultimately, it's theirs to make. In our case, the ultimate risk is either accepted or remediated by our founders and owners. Right? They have the ultimate kind of say in that.
Of course. Thank you, Alex. Much appreciated. I've got a couple of questions myself. I'm going to take this next one as well, if that's okay with you, before I do. We've only got 4 or 5 minutes left. It's gone so quick. Nice hearing from a strong networking-based CISO. What can we do to efficiently use frameworks and not become a vCISO app? What should we keep in mind for the business's success?
Interesting question. So not become a virtual CISO app, meaning not be overwritten by artificial intelligence somehow?
I think that's kind of what I'm reading into it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because everything else is being taken over by AI at the moment. So why not that, I suppose?
I appreciate the question. Yeah, I mean, frameworks, I tend to think of risk, well, I won't even go there, but the frameworks are a great starting point for me to have discussions with the executive team. And what I realize is even, very few people really understand what happens in security. We try to be very transparent. We try to be very open about what we're doing and how we're bringing value, especially to my immediate boss and the board and the folks that I report to. But even then, it's still very difficult sometimes to explain exactly what we do, and that still remains a challenge. But frameworks allow me to actually tell that story. It's the level at which I have discussions with the very senior leadership team, even though there's other things that we have to safeguard that are still pertinent to the risk discussion. It's the frameworks that allow me to have some really good dialogue with the executive teams. I guess in terms of having success with these folks, it's the one thing that unfortunately or fortunately I leveraged to ensure that I can build these strong relationships with these P&L owners, because it's so clear cut. There's already a common nomenclature. We can speak about risk taxonomy and the way that resonates with them. But it's my job to marry those discussions with relevant business business acumen. So I think the key to success for me has been establishing relationships with the people that I'm going to make asks from before I have to make those asks. So I get to know people. People are very busy. We have competing interests. This is one thing that's not necessarily making their life easier. So it's important to build up those relationships before you start building your program on top of what it is that they're doing. So I hope that helps.
It definitely does. I don't know whether to ask you this question or the next one. What one shall we go for? Let me think. Ooh, it's a difficult one. Okay, I'm going to cover off. Let's do the skills gap. So we hear a lot about skills gaps in cybersecurity, normally aimed at people breaking in and kind of the entry level area. Do you think there's a skills gap? And if there is, where is it?
It's hard to say. For me, I only speak from personal experience, right? I haven't surveyed the land, and I read what everybody else reads, that there is a skills gap. The challenge for me, I lead both enterprise cybersecurity programs or back-end administrative stuff, so your typical corporate cybersecurity program, but I also have product security under my charter. I find that the hardest jobs to fill are definitely on the application security side, so product cybersecurity specific. And in my case, folks that are product security, automotive domain experts. Those are not,
because there's just not many of them about. Yeah.
No, there isn't. I find the easiest jobs to fill have been my SOC analyst, believe it or not, even though there's a lot of churn and attrition in that space because there's burnout. But in my case, that seems to be kind of an easy fill for me. And I tend to tap into forward markets. I don't necessarily fill those jobs. I'm not going to say they're not low end jobs. I just mean that they're very introductory. And so they're a little bit easier to take a chance on somebody out of college so that I can train and mold to my liking. There's a big pool of applicants in that space. That's my experience.
Well, and I suppose the next question would be then, because there's a lot of people in our community who are in the position of trying to break in. And as you're probably aware, when you come into the industry and you don't know much about it, you either think you're going to be a SOC analyst or a pen tester, right? Until you discover there's 50 other roles. So that's probably a lot of the training is focused around building people up for that. But as an employer, what do you look for? There's so many candidates to choose from with the same qualifications, similar backgrounds. What is it that makes a candidate stand out for you?
I think long gone are the days where I just wanted a pure technician, somebody who can speak authoritatively on a particular technology. I look for problem solvers. Left brain thinkers, folks that are coming out of liberal arts programs they're broad thinkers and they think outside the box and they're creative. And I think that lends itself well to the type of work that we do. You do have to kind of think outside the box if you're going to be providing offense or defense and say a SOC, right? And so I tend to look for folks that can articulate how they've solved problems. And there's no right or wrong answers to my interview questions, but I tend to I tend to present a problem, and I like to hear how they go about thinking through it and solving it, because that says a lot about.
That's the process that you're interested in rather than the answer.
Absolutely. And that's how I pride myself when I've gone into an interview. Yes, I do cybersecurity work, and I consider myself an expert in the space, but I also pride myself on being a problem solver for the organization. Right.
I think that's key, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's key. It's what they're looking for. You got to be able to wear many hats. Yeah, you are being brought in for a very specific thing, but you're part of this business, and I tend to treat my little space, my spoke on that 16-wheeler as as a small part of the business, but I'm a business stakeholder as well, and I'm making sure that I'm arming our team with folks that can solve problems and not become part of the problem.
I think that's great to hear, and I've seen that personally with my 18-year-old. He's in the other room at the moment. He finished his technology levels at school, did some work experience at Aviva, the financial services company, and he threw his application in the ring with 7,000 other people, most of whom had graduated university, so they were like 20, 21 years old, and he got the job over all of them for that exact reason.
That's fantastic.
That's what they said to him. His brain works differently from mine, so he's very good at that. I don't think I've got time for any more of my questions because we've got 2 more in the chat, and I think it's only right that we address, if it's okay with you, the audience's questions rather than mine. So I'll do them chronologically. This is Linda. Thank you, Linda. How do you see the role of the CISO evolving in response to the changing cybersecurity landscape? It's actually one of my questions on here. You've been reading my notes, Linda, I think.
How do I see the role of the CISO evolving? Well, I think it just continues to. I'm seeing that it's continuing to rise to the level of, say, what the CIO is. And I know you've probably read this or heard this, but the CIO was just kind of a technical manager at one point that slowly, organically over time became this person that was given a seat at the table, has a profit and loss, is a digital transformation leader. I think that's what we're moving towards, right? You can't execute a business strategy without kind of considering how will technology play a part in ensuring our success. And I think you can't think about those things without thinking about the security implications, especially 100%. if you're a global company, a public company, a company handling personal data. You got to have some representation, and so hopefully. I'd like to think that even maybe after I retire or whenever for as long as I'm here, that we'll get to a point where the CISO truly has that seat at the table and is equivalent to the CIO. It's no longer or ever thought of as anything less than, say, the CIO, because we are partners and we're peers and we have to work together, not underneath each other and so forth. So I think that's where I'd like to see things going, and hopefully that's where it's moving now with this new SEC cybersecurity reporting guideline.
Which will mean probably different skill sets for a lot of CISOs out there, learning the language of the business. What advice would you have given yourself 15 years ago before you came into a leadership role, if you could?
Yeah, I think it took me a while to not be so. I think we all have a little bit of a personality when we move into these roles, and we think we have all the right answers. And you realize over time that our job truly is to be advisory in nature. We got to gain the trust of the business stakeholders who have a million and one things to do and have to make really important decisions about what direction they're taking certain things in the organization. And it's our job to make sure that we're facilitating those decisions with really good information, because we're all risk managers. We're all in it together. I may own the cybersecurity function, but everybody owns cybersecurity, especially the leaders at the top. So I think. Not taking things so personally. When you're a young cybersecurity engineer in the 20s, it's like, how dare you not move forward with the decision and the recommendations I made, right? Then you realize as you start getting older, I've provided everything I could. Do they have everything they need to make this decision? Can I provide any additional research to inform you, right? And it's not to say that that's all we do and that we're just a consultant, but it's a big part of ensuring trust not only from your consumer, but also trust from the internal customers that you serve, because that's how I see myself. I'm a servant leader to the organizational leaders.
You said that the importance of building relationships and storytelling comes into its own, I would have thought.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Got to be good at that.
A couple of questions around SOC before we wrap things up. We mentioned earlier that there was a lot of burnout being a SOC analyst, and Tay asked the question, why is that?
I think it's and this is just my take. I worked with a larger team when I was at Panasonic. We built out a SOC. We built out a SOC first for the airlines to provide a monetized service, and then we built out a huge regional SOC to provide services to the 31 business units that were being served by Panasonic North America. What I learned along the way is that the burnout is because of the way traditional SOCs are probably structured. You have level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 typically resolves 70% of your issues. It's what you consider your cheapest labor. There are new folks that are coming in, and all they're looking at is red, green, and yellow, and they're responding to very prescriptive playbooks. And
Yeah.
you do that day in, day out, without any other activity. It's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
But what I am seeing, at least on the vehicle SOC side, is a bit of a transition. So rather than saying I'm just going to bring in traditional level 1, 2, and 3, you kind of flatten out the organizational structure and allow these level 1 engineers to cross-train with your 2s and 3s. Your 2s are going to be the folks that think a little bit outside the box.
Yeah.
They're not taking the brunt of the issues that are coming in. And your level 3s are your engineers that have the tribal knowledge. They're taking on the biggest issues. Hopefully those are few and far between, because that's your most expensive labor pool. But now is what I'm seeing with a few of my peers is they're collapsing that level 1, 2, and 3 to provide cross training.
That makes so much sense.
That burnout. Yeah. So we'll see if that's a model that continues to get some uptake. But that's why I believe there's burnout in the SOC.
Do you think? I think the next question actually might lead into this quite nicely. Khalid's asked, how do you manage human errors in the SOC? Does it stop at better vendor solutions or an increase in a team of innovative security engineers? Asking to see where we should focus the budget on. Good question.
That's a very good question. I mean, so how do you manage the human errors at the SOC? The human errors, I think, and again, I have maybe 5 years of experience managing a real SOC. So I know there's folks that are much more experienced at this than I am, but the human error is really as a result of process breakdown, I think, because a lot of what you do in the SOC is driven by, well, in my case, we introduced a lot of automation, and where we couldn't introduce a lot of automation, were manual playbooks. So really the breakdown is in procedures not being followed. Does it stop at better vendor solutions or an increase in a team of innovative security engineers? I think that plays a big part. Certainly your process only gets better, right, if you have quality security engineers that are playing a big part in ensuring your successful SOC implementation. But I wouldn't say that's the only answer, or the answer to the problem. I think there's always going to be human error. And I think, good education, good engagement, well-developed playbooks, and a good
regular breaks.
Yeah. You have what I call now CTF and capture the flag exercises inside of your SOC, right? You make it a little bit exciting because they entered the field to be not only defensive, but they want to also be offensive. So giving them a break from the day to day, and then of course changing up the shifts, I think, and giving people a break to cross train in other areas of the organization that are doing security work has been beneficial for our teams. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Last question then before we wrap things up, and I'm asking it because I've seen a certain Cody Kennedy in the audience, and for those that don't know Cody is a very, very bright young man. I hope you don't mind me calling you a young man. I am 50 this year, Cody, so excuse me. Who's set up a company called Connect.io, which is trying to bridge the gap of the question that I'm now going to ask you about, Alex. And the question is, what can vendors do better to engage with buyers? Because all we see on LinkedIn is buyers moaning about the way vendors are approaching them. And going back to the previous question, where I think they asked, do you need to spend more money on tools to make it an improvement? I think the industry, from an outside non-expert perspective, the budgets have gone up year on year for tool spends. The breaches have continued the same graph line. That, to me, doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, vendors have created a big narrative in the industry around tooling. What can they do better, though, to engage with buyers?
Yeah, and it doesn't help that there's always a Gartner report that's saying, hey, this group is this category. They all fall into this space. And if you don't fall into this space, well, what exactly do you fall into? You sound like you do that. And that's my only reference mark. Yeah, so I suffer from vendor overload on LinkedIn. It's really become most people that are knocking on my door are not necessarily folks that are necessarily looking to network through LinkedIn, because that's originally what it was. It's really a salesperson knocking on my door saying that they have the answer to a problem. They have no idea what kind of problem I have. So that's a real challenge in my pet peeve. I find I'm part of certain, I won't mention the conference groups, but I like the intimate interaction that you get from being a captive member of a conference. And I'd like to be a part of these kind of boardroom discussions or conferences where a vendor will present on a problem. They're not necessarily there to sell. They're there to present how they see a particular issue faced by security organizations is being solved. And by the way, we happen to do a little bit of that. And here's some other players that do it as well, right? They're very just, there's a bunch of confidence. We're trying to solve the problem together. And here's a set of resources that does it. We happen to be in that space as well. I'd rather approach it that way, just because I'm so overwhelmed by just the number of solutions that are out there to solve similar problems, or I just sometimes don't even know how to make the connection between what they're doing and they're doing, even though Gartner says they operate in the same space, they look completely different. So
I think automation has been amazing for many things. I think when it comes to sale processes, not convinced that in every case it's working terribly well. You mentioned that you get bombarded with people saying, I can solve your problem before knowing what your problems are. And I think the whole we'll automate everything, we don't need people involved is a big issue around that. But what, and this isn't a sales pitch, I'm not a shareholder or anything of Cody's business, but he's an SDR for a very well-known big player in the industry. And he identified the same problem very quickly. And he's built a platform that enables users to register for free and be anonymous on there and reach out and speak to vendors about their different projects or issues that they've got. And then when you get, and then when you get to a point where you're ready to have discussions, you can turn the anonymous bit off to certain people and say, yes, I'd like to have a chat. So it gives you the chance to do the digging around without revealing who you are, whether you've got a problem. And then when you're ready to engage with them, you can. It's early stages. I think we're about a year or so in, Cody, aren't you? But it's really, really exciting. I'll put it in the chat here should anyone want to have a look. And I know for any leaders watching, Cody's really keen to get as many of you on there as he can at the moment to get some feedback to see how he could improve it. So if anyone's watching who fancies registering for Connect.io, please check it out. I have put it in the chat. But Alex, that's about us. I've got spaghetti bolognese downstairs for my dinner and I can smell it. And I'm actually starting to salivate a little bit down here while I've been talking to you. So look, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I'm hoping, are you RSA this year?
Not this year. Not this year.
No. Well, I won't see you there then. I was going to say I'll see you maybe at RSA.
RSA, I mean, if you do, maybe perhaps DEF CON or Black Hat, I might be joining
I'll be there
this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm doing hosting an event for Bug Crowd at Black Hat. So yeah, definitely we'll have to catch up face to face. Thank you so much. And audience, thank you again for all the questions. It really is, it's the guests and the audience that make this show so special. So thank you so much for that. Alex, have an amazing weekend.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Any last wise words for everyone before we go?
So I just want to thank everybody for hearing me talk and rant about cybersecurity. I appreciate the questions. So thank you so much. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn if I can be of service or I can help navigate your career and provide some guidance. I'm here for you.
Do you know what? Actually, before we stop then, if you don't mind, I'm going to drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
If you get bombarded, don't be swearing about me at the weekend. I suppose I should have really asked you if you drive an electric car, shouldn't I?
I do.
You do?
Have an electric car, yes. I won't mention which one, though.
It's a Tesla, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Alex, thank you so much. It's been amazing. Audience, thank you.
There for a minute.
Oh, you're back. Audience, thank you so much. Alex, thank you so much. I'll let you get back to your no manufacturer name electric car. Have a great weekend. You can't hear me. See you soon.
Thank you.